How could you be so selfish? My father bellowed, his face red with anger as he paced across the living room of their lake house. Your brother needs this money for his business, and you have more than enough. I stood there, my hands clutching the property tax bill I'd just been ambushed with. What was supposed to be a casual Sunday dinner had turned into a full-blown interrogation. My name is Evelyn Carter, I thought to myself, trying to ground myself in the moment. I was 34 years old and had built a successful career as a financial analyst. Unlike my younger brother, Jason, the first hadn't been handed anything in life. Every dollar I had was the result of long nights, calculated risks, and sheer determination. For the past 5 years, I had been quietly covering the property taxes on this vacation home, helping with my mom's medical bills, and even paying off Jason's car when he fell behind. I never complained. I thought I was giving back to the family that raised me. Or so I thought. Dad, I've been paying for everything for years, I said, keeping my voice steady. The taxes, Jason's expenses, even some of Mom's medical bills. I've never asked for anything in return. But I can't keep doing this. My mother sat silently on the couch, her hands clasped in her lap. She refused to look at me, and that hurt more than my father shouting. We gave you everything growing up, Dad continued, his voice dripping with entitlement. And now that we need you, you're abandoning us while Jason is trying to build something of his own. That's when I noticed the envelope on the coffee table, half hidden under a magazine. The words trust fund and Jason Carter stood out in bold lettering. My stomach tightened. I reached for it before my father could react. Evelyn, that's private, he snapped, but I was already reading. A substantial trust fund. For Jason. Only Jason. My father, the same man who had told me there wasn't enough money to help me with college, had been funneling money into a trust fund for my brother. The same father who had let me work 2 jobs just to afford tuition, while Jason got everything handed to him on a silver platter. When were you going to tell me about this? I asked, my voice calm but ice cold. You weren't supposed to see that, Dad muttered, snatching the document from my hands. I let out a humorless laugh. Right. I was never supposed to see the truth. Looking back, the favoritism had always been there. Jason got dance lessons and designer clothes while I was told to be practical. He got a brand new car at 16 while I had to save up for a used one. When it was time for college, Jason went to a private university with full family support, while I pieced together scholarships and took on student debt. Mom finally spoke, her voice soft but filled with the same manipulation I had heard my whole life. Sweetheart, your brother needs more help than you do. You've always been independent, so capable. We're so proud of how well you've done on your own. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. So, let me get this straight. I was punished for being successful while Jason was rewarded for doing nothing? Dad shifted uncomfortably. Investment decisions aren't that simple, Evelyn. We had to think about the future. I stared at him, incredulous. Just not my future, right? My eyes flicked back to the bill on the table. The annual property tax, $9,200, was due next month. I had paid it for 5 years, along with countless other expenses, all while they secretly built a financial safety net for Jason. The taxes are due soon, Dad said, sliding the bill toward me as if none of this had just happened. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw him for what he was: entitled, selfish, and utterly unaware of how much I had sacrificed. Something inside me shifted. I'll take care of it, I said quietly, picking up the bill. Dad visibly relaxed. He had no idea what I meant. The drive back to my apartment felt longer than usual. My phone buzzed with messages, but I ignored them. I sat down at my desk and opened a folder I had maintained for years, but never thought I'd need. A spreadsheet titled Family Contributions. Every payment, every wire transfer, every check documented down to the last cent. 5 years of property taxes, $46,000. Jason's car payments, $14,500. Mom's medical expenses, $11,200. Family vacations labeled as gifts, $19,000. Investments in Jason's failed business ideas, $44,000. The total made me feel physically ill, $135,000, and they still had the audacity to ask for more. Another text came through, this time from Jason. Dad says you're being difficult about the taxes. Don't be selfish, Evelyn, I exhaled sharply. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Of course Jason would take their side. He had never known struggle. Then, another text. We're counting on you for the taxes. Don't let us down. No thank you. No acknowledgement of what I had already given. Just another demand. That was the moment I decided I was done. The next morning, I called Joseph Lang, my financial advisor. When we met in his office, I laid out everything: my spreadsheet, my receipts, the proof of every sacrifice I had made. Joseph leaned back in his chair, scanning the documents. Evelyn, this is a lot. You've been supporting them financially while they've been securing Jason's future. And you've never asked for repayment? I shook my head. They're family. I thought I was helping. Joseph studied me for a moment before speaking. And have they ever helped you? The silence stretched between us. No, I admitted. Joseph nodded. Then it's time to change things. For the next 2 hours, we developed a plan. Step 1, officially documenting every financial contribution I had made. Step 2, setting up a completely separate account one where my money would stay with me. Because from this moment on, my priority was no longer funding my family's entitled lifestyle. It was securing my own future. I woke up the next morning with a strange sense of clarity. The kind that comes after a long overdue decision. No second guessing, no guilt, just quiet determination. The first thing I did was cancel the automatic payment for Jason's car. Then I removed myself as an authorized payer on all family accounts. I wasn't their personal bank anymore. At noon, my phone started blowing up. Jason, what the hell, Evelyn? My car payment bounced. Are you trying to screw up my credit? Dad, we need to talk. This behavior is unacceptable. Mom, sweetheart, I don't know what's going on, but please don't make any rash decisions. We can work this out as a family. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on my meeting with Victor Hernandez, the forensic accountant Joseph had recommended. I sat across from him in his office as he sifted through the financial records I had compiled. Your documentation is thorough, Victor noted, flipping through the paperwork. Most people don't keep records this detailed. I had to laugh. I work in finance. Tracking numbers is second nature. He nodded approvingly. So, what's your goal here? Do you want to pursue legal action, or are you just looking to document everything for your own protection? I exhaled, weighing my words carefully. For now, I just want it all in black and white. No more gaslighting, no more pretending. I need them to see exactly what I've done for them. Victor slid a report across the desk. Then here's your total. Including lost investment potential, the amount you funneled into your family's lifestyle adds up to $148,500. I stared at the number. It was one thing to know the rough total, it was another to see it laid out, in indisputable detail. I ran my fingers over the paper. And they still had the nerve to set up a trust for Jason, while making me shoulder everything. Victor leaned forward. If you ever decide to take legal action, you have enough documentation to make a strong case. But even if you don't, this gives you leverage. Leverage. I'd spent my whole life bending to their expectations. It was time to see what happened when I didn't. 3 days later, I got a call from my mother. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but I was done avoiding them. I picked up. Mom. Evelyn, she started, her voice unusually careful. Your father is very upset. The property tax deadline is coming up, and we still haven't received your payment. I took a slow breath. That's because I'm not paying it. A long silence. Then, in a quiet, disbelieving voice, what do you mean? I mean, I'm done, I said simply. I've covered those taxes for 5 years. You and Dad have the money. Use it. But, no, Mom. I cut her off, my voice firmer than I'd ever allowed it to be. I saw the trust fund. I know exactly where your money has been going. You had more than enough to help me when I was struggling, but you chose to funnel everything into Jason. So, no, I'm not covering another cent. She let out a shaky breath. Your father, he's not handling this well. I almost laughed. I bet he's not. Evelyn, the lake house means so much to him. If the taxes aren't paid, then maybe it's time for him to make a choice, I said flatly. Either use some of the money you set aside for Jason, or let the house go. Another long pause. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I don't know how we got here. I did. It happened the moment they decided Jason's future mattered more than mine. I have to go, Mom, I said, my voice softer now. I hope you understand. She didn't respond before hanging up. The next day, my cousin Thomas called. You need to know something, he said. Your dad called a family meeting this weekend. I frowned. A meeting? He's telling everyone you abandoned the family, Thomas explained. That you're trying to punish them by refusing to pay the property taxes. He's trying to get the whole family to turn against you. I should have expected this. Dad never handled losing control well. I appreciate the heads up, I said. You should come, Thomas said firmly. Set the record straight. A week ago, I wouldn't have even considered it. But now, I was tired of being the villain in a story where I'd been the only one giving. I'll be there. When I walked into my parents' house that Saturday, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Aunts, uncles, cousins, they were all gathered in the living room, murmuring amongst themselves. My father stood at the front, his arms crossed, already mid-speech. And now, when we need her most, Evelyn has decided she's too good for her family obligations. I let the words hang in the air for a moment before stepping forward. That's not what happened. Dad's face tightened. Then, by all means, explain it to us. I set my briefcase down on the coffee table and pulled out the documents. Victor had compiled. For the past 5 years, I have paid a total of $148,500 to support this family. I covered the property taxes, Jason's expenses, medical bills, vacations, everything. And while I was doing that, you were quietly building a $350,000 trust fund for Jason. The room went silent. My Aunt Linda looked at my father, confused. Greg, is this true? Dad's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. I turned to face the room. I don't mind helping family, but I was never given the same support. I worked multiple jobs in college while Jason got everything covered. I was told there wasn't enough money, while Dad was secretly securing Jason's future. Jason, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke up. It's not like that, he muttered. Dad was just what? I snapped. Being a good father to you while treating me like a walking ATM? Jason flinched. He had never been confronted with the reality of his privilege before. Uncle Pete let out a low whistle. Greg, you need to make this right. For the first time in my life, my father looked rattled. He had expected me to back down, to quietly accept his version of the story. But now, in front of everyone, the truth was laid bare. I picked up my documents and turned to leave. You all can decide what to do about the lake house, but I'm done being used. I walked out, feeling lighter than I had in years. Dad didn't call me that night. Neither did Mom. But the next morning, I woke up to a text from Jason. We need to talk. For the first time in my life, I let him wait. I didn't respond to Jason's text. Not that I didn't want a curiosity gnawed at me. Was he finally waking up to the reality of our family dynamic? Or was this just another attempt to guilt trip me? Either way, I wasn't ready to engage. Instead, I focused on myself. For the first time in years, my money was mine. No more family bills, no more emergency transfers, just me and my future. But peace doesn't last long when you have entitled parents. 2 days after the family meeting, I got an email from my father. The subject line was short and to the point. Final notice, property taxes. I rolled my eyes before even opening it. Evelyn, the property taxes are now overdue, and late fees are accumulating. You are making a very poor decision by refusing to help your family. You have always been the responsible one, and I expected better from you. We can discuss this once you're thinking clearly. But in the meantime, I suggest you take care of your obligations before this situation worsens. Dad obligations? My blood boiled. I had no legal obligation to pay anything. They were the homeowners, not me. And yet, after everything that had come to light, he still expected me to play my role. I shut my laptop with a sharp snap and took a deep breath. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to panic, to scramble to fix things. Not this time. That afternoon, I had lunch with Thomas. He was the only family member who had truly supported me since this all began. You know he's telling everyone you're letting the house fall into foreclosure on purpose, right? Thomas said between bites of his sandwich. I snorted. Of course he is. Gotta paint me as the villain. He's also been calling other relatives, trying to get them to pitch in, Thomas added. But once they found out about the trust fund, no one's eager to help. I almost choked on my drink. Wait, he actually asked other people for money? Yep, Thomas smirked. And let's just say Aunt Linda was not impressed. That was satisfying in a way I couldn't put into words. My father had spent years spinning the narrative that I was the successful one who needed to support the family. Now that the truth was out, he was scrambling, and no one was lining up to save him. But I should have known he wouldn't back down so easily. 3 days later, my doorbell rang. I checked the peephole, and my stomach dropped. Jason. I considered ignoring him, but something told me this conversation needed to happen. I unlatched the door and stepped aside. He looked different, not his usual smug, carefree self. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual confidence seemed deflated. "What do you want, Jason?" I asked, arms crossed. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't know it was that much. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't know what was that much? The money, he admitted. Dad always said you were helping here and there because you had extra. I had no idea you were paying everything. I studied him carefully. Was this actual guilt? Or just an attempt to manipulate me? So, now you know, I said flatly. What do you want me to do about it? Jason shifted awkwardly. I get why you're mad, and you're right, it wasn't fair. A pause. I wasn't expecting that. Then why didn't you ever question it? I asked. He exhaled. Because it benefited me, and I never had to think about where the money was coming from. There it was. The truth. For years, he had enjoyed the privileges our parents handed him without ever considering the cost, and I had been too exhausted, too conditioned to call it out. I'm not paying for anything anymore, I said firmly. Not your car, not the lake house, not another family vacation. It's over. Jason nodded slowly. I figured as much. Another beat of silence. Dad's losing it, he finally said. He's freaking out about the taxes and what people will think if he loses the house. I shrugged. That's his problem. Jason let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, I guess it is. He hesitated before continuing. I told him he should use my trust fund to cover the taxes. I stared at him, and he refused, Jason admitted. Said that money is for my future, not for workless decisions. I barked out a bitter laugh. Of course. He's perfectly fine using my money, but God forbid he dip into yours. Jason rubbed his temples. Yeah, that was pretty eye-opening. I tilted my head. So why are you really here? He hesitated. Then, finally, I told Dad if he didn't start treating you fairly, I'd take matters into my own hands. That caught my attention. Meaning? Jason pulled out an envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. I opened it, my breath catching as I scanned the contents. A legal document. An official transfer of 25% ownership of the lake house to me. I used my trust fund to cover the taxes, Jason said. And I made Dad sign over a quarter of the property to you. He wasn't happy about it, but I figured it was the least I could do. I looked at him, genuinely stunned. Why? I asked, my voice quieter than before. Jason met my eyes. Because I finally get it. You deserved better. And this doesn't fix everything, but it's a start. I swallowed hard. For the first time, Jason had done something that wasn't just in his own interest. Thank you, I said. And for once, I meant it. He gave me a small nod. Don't let Dad push you around anymore, Ev. I won't either. As he left, I sat there, staring at the document. It wasn't about the house. It was about fairness, about finally being acknowledged. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Later that night, I got another text from Dad. This was unnecessary. Family helps family. I didn't respond. But I did take a screenshot of the lake house ownership document and sent it back to him. No words. Just proof that the rules had changed. For good. The silence from my father was deafening. After years of controlling the narrative, he had finally lost his grip. And I knew that silence wouldn't last. 2 days after Jason transferred me partial ownership of the lake house, the inevitable happened. My phone rang, my mother's name flashing on the screen. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but part of me wanted to hear what excuse she'd come up with this time. I picked up. Mom. She hesitated, like she wasn't sure how to start. Evelyn, your father is upset. I nearly laughed. Of course he is. He says you pressured Jason into signing over part of the house. She continued. That you manipulated him into taking money from his trust. I exhaled sharply, gripping the phone tighter. I didn't pressure Jason to do anything. He did it because he realized how unfair everything was. That's not how your father sees it, she murmured. He feels betrayed. I let that sit for a second. He felt betrayed? After everything he had done, I shook my head. That's not my problem. Mom sighed. Evelyn, you know how much the lake house means to him. If you refuse to cooperate, you're just making things harder on everyone. There it was. The same manipulation, just with softer words. I already made things easy for years, Mom, I said, my patience wearing thin. I paid the taxes. I covered the bills. I never asked for anything in return. You both let me do it while secretly securing Jason's future. You think I don't know what's really happening here? She stayed silent. You and Dad thought I'd just keep paying forever, I continued. That I'd never push back. But now that I have, suddenly it's my fault things are falling apart? Her voice cracked. We never meant to hurt you. I closed my eyes. Maybe. But you did. I didn't wait for her to respond before ending the call. That night, I went through my email. Sure enough, there was another message from my father. Subject, let's be reasonable, Evelyn. You've made your point. But this situation is getting out of control. Your brother acted impulsively, and now you have legal ownership of something that should remain a family asset. I'm willing to negotiate. Let's sit down like adults and work this out. Dad, I scoffed. Now that I had leverage, he suddenly wanted to negotiate. After years of taking advantage of me, he was finally feeling what it was like to be on the other side. I typed back a simple response. Dad, I have nothing to negotiate. The taxes have been paid by Jason. You don't have to worry about that anymore. As for my ownership of the house, I suggest you get used to it. Evelyn, I hit send and closed my laptop. The next day, Thomas called. I just got off the phone with Aunt Linda, he said, his voice tinged with amusement. Your dad's been calling everyone in the family, trying to rally support. I rolled my eyes. Let me guess. He's playing the victim? Oh, big time, Thomas confirmed. He's saying you stole part of the house and turned Jason against him. I laughed humorlessly. Did anyone actually buy that? Not really, he admitted. After they found out about the trust fund, most people lost sympathy. Aunt Linda straight up told him, maybe if you treated both your kids fairly, you wouldn't be in this mess. I leaned back, letting that sink in. My father had spent years carefully maintaining his image, the devoted father, the generous family man. Now, that facade was crumbling. He's desperate, Thomas added. And when Dad gets desperate, I sighed. He does something reckless. By the weekend, the storm finally hit. Jason and I were having lunch when his phone buzzed. He frowned, glancing at the screen. It's Dad. I raised an eyebrow. Are you answering? Jason hesitated, then put the phone on speaker before setting it down. Dad's voice came through, tight with controlled anger. Jason, I just spoke with our lawyer. Do you have any idea what you've done? Jason leaned back in his chair. Yeah, Dad. I helped Evelyn get what she deserved. Dad scoffed. Deserved? She manipulated you into giving away part of our family home. I crossed my arms. It's our family home now, actually. The line went dead silent. Then, in a voice low with warning, Dad said, You've really crossed a line, Evelyn. I rolled my eyes. No, Dad. You crossed the line when you let me pay for everything while setting Jason up for life. You just don't like that I finally stopped playing along. Jason jumped in. I told you to use my trust fund for the taxes, but you refused. You'd rather let the house go into foreclosure than touch my money, but you had no problem draining Evelyn's savings for years? Dad let out a sharp breath. That's different. No, Jason shot back. It's not. I watched as my brother stood up for me, truly stood up for me, for the first time. Dad's voice dropped lower. You think you're both so smart, don't you? But let me tell you something, this isn't over. Jason let out a short laugh. Yeah, it is. Dad hung up. Jason looked at me. He's going to try something. I nodded. Let him. A week passed without another word from my father. And then, just when I thought maybe he was finally giving up, I got an email from a lawyer. Subject, Notice of intent to contest ownership. I read through it quickly, my pulse steady. Dad was trying to challenge the transfer of ownership, claiming Jason had been coerced into giving me a stake in the house. I sighed. I should have expected this. But here's the thing, Jason had done everything legally. He had used his own trust fund money to pay the taxes. The ownership transfer had been signed, notarized, and filed. Dad had no case. But that didn't mean he wouldn't try. I forwarded the email to my own lawyer with a short note. Handle this. That night, Jason and I sat on my balcony, looking out over the city. Do you regret it? I asked. He shook his head. No. For the first time in my life, I feel like I actually did the right thing. I smiled. Dad's going to drag this out. Let him, Jason said. He can throw all the tantrums he wants. But in the end, he's lost. I took a deep breath, letting it sink in. For the first time, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix everything. Dad could fight all he wanted, but I wasn't playing his game anymore. The lawsuit was a joke. I knew it. Jason knew it. Even the lawyer my father hired had to know it. But that didn't stop my father from throwing every bit of energy he had into fighting what he saw as a betrayal. It didn't matter that Jason had willingly signed over part of the house. It didn't matter that the documents were legally sound. In my father's mind, none of that was the point. Control was the point, and he was grasping at it with both hands. Jason and I sat in my lawyer's office going over the case. Her name was Valerie, sharp as hell, and I liked her immediately leaned back in her chair and tapped a pen against the desk. Your father doesn't have a legal leg to stand on, she said plainly. Jason transferred ownership of the house voluntarily. The taxes were paid with his own trust fund. There was no coercion, no fraud. Jason scoffed. Tell that to my dad. He thinks he can intimidate his way out of this. Valerie nodded. That's exactly what this is. A scare tactic. He's hoping you'll fold under pressure. I exhaled slowly. He doesn't know me very well then, Jason smirked. He sure as hell doesn't know me either. Valerie grinned. Good. Because here's what's going to happen. We're going to file a response outlining exactly why his claim is baseless. Then, we're going to file a counterclaim for legal fees. I raised an eyebrow. You think he'll back down? She tilted her head. He's stubborn, but he's also cheap. The moment he realizes this is going to cost him more than he's willing to pay, he'll start rethinking his strategy. I nodded. Then let's do it. It took 3 days for Dad to react. He didn't call me. He didn't email. He didn't even try to send a passive-aggressive message through Mom. Instead, he showed up at my apartment. I heard the knock and knew, before even looking, that it was him. I opened the door just enough to see his face tight with frustration. Eyes narrowed like he was still trying to figure out how this had all slipped from his control. Dad? I said flatly. Evelyn, he replied, his voice carefully neutral. We need to talk. I didn't move. There's nothing left to talk about. His jaw clenched. You're making this a lot harder than it needs to be. I let out a short laugh. Oh, I'm making it hard? He exhaled through his nose. I don't want this to turn into a bigger mess than it already is. Then drop the lawsuit, I said simply. He scoffed. I don't think you understand. No, Dad, I cut him off. I understand perfectly. You're throwing a tantrum because for the first time in your life, you didn't get your way. His face darkened. That's not what this is. Really? I folded my arms. Because from where I'm standing, this looks a whole lot like you trying to punish me for standing up for myself. A long silence. Then, finally, he sighed. You don't get it, Evelyn. That house, it's part of our legacy. It's supposed to stay in the family. I stared at him, unblinking. And yet, for years you had no problem using my money to keep it, while setting aside Jason's money for his future. You can say whatever you want about legacy, but the truth is, I was never part of your plan. I was just the funding. He shifted, uncomfortable. That's not fair. No, it's not, I agreed. And yet, here we are. For the first time, he had nothing to say. I let the silence stretch. Then I took a step back and started to close the door. Goodbye, Dad. Before I could shut it completely, he said something that nearly made me stop. You're turning your back on family. I paused for half a second. Then, without looking back, I closed the door. I locked it. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely free. 2 weeks later, the lawsuit was dropped. Valerie had been right once Dad realized he was burning money with no chance of winning. He gave up. It didn't happen with an apology. There was no grand admission of wrongdoing. Instead, I got a 2-line email. Evelyn, I hope you're satisfied. That was it. No, I'm sorry. No acknowledgement of what he had done. Just bitterness. And you know what? That was fine. Because I was satisfied, Jason and I celebrated over dinner. You know, he said, taking a sip of his drink. I never thought I'd see the day where Dad actually lost. I smirked. It was long overdue. Jason exhaled, shaking his head. I still feel guilty, though. I let it go on for too long. I shrugged. You can't change the past, but you did the right thing in the end. He nodded. Yeah, and I'm not letting him manipulate me again. I clinked my glass against his. Good. Neither am I. A month later, something strange happened. I got an email from my mother. It was different from her usual messages. No guilt tripping. No passive-aggressive pleading. Just a short, quiet note. Evelyn, I don't know if you'll believe me, but I want you to know that I see it now. I see how unfair it was. And I'm sorry. I stared at the words, rereading them over and over. For a long time, I didn't know how to respond. Then, finally, I typed back, I hope you mean that. Because I'm not going back to the way things were. She didn't reply right away. But when she did, her message was simple. I understand. And for the first time, I thought just maybe she actually did. I didn't expect things to change overnight. Dad would never admit he was wrong. Jason and I would probably always carry the weight of our upbringing in different ways. But things were different now, because I had finally set a boundary, and I wasn't letting anyone cross it again. And for the first time in years, my future felt like mine. The strangest part about taking back control of my life wasn't the relief, it was the silence. For years, my phone had been a constant source of stress. My father demanding money, my mother subtly pressuring me, Jason, knowingly or not, benefiting from it all. Every text, every call, every email had been another weight added to my shoulders. And now, nothing. It had been weeks since the lawsuit was dropped. My father had stopped reaching out, his pride too wounded to acknowledge defeat. My mother sent the occasional neutral message, careful not to push too hard. Jason and I talked regularly, though there were still moments where guilt crept into his voice. But overall, silence. And I had never felt so free. One evening, I sat on my balcony, sipping a glass of wine as the city lights twinkled below. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn breeze that made you feel alive. For the first time in years, I let myself think about what I wanted. Not what my family needed, not what I was obligated to do, what I wanted. And the answer came surprisingly fast. I wanted to invest in myself. The next morning, I met with Joseph, my financial advisor. You're in a good place, he said, scanning my portfolio. Now that you're no longer hemorrhaging money into your family's expenses, your investments are growing faster than expected. I nodded. That's great. But I don't just want to save, I want to build something for myself. Joseph raised an eyebrow. Well, what are you thinking? I exhaled, feeling a flicker of excitement. Real estate. I've spent years paying for a house that wasn't even mine. I want to own something for me. He smiled. I like the way you're thinking. For the next hour, we went over options. I had more than enough for a down payment, and with my financial background, I could make smart choices. By the time I left his office, I felt something I hadn't in years. Excited. I kept the search quiet. I didn't want my parents twisting it into something about them. This was for me. 2 weeks later, I found it. A small, modern cabin nestled by the lake, ironically, not far from the one I had spent years paying for. But this one was mine. No family strings, no expectations, just peace. Jason came to see it first. He stepped onto the deck, hands in his pockets, taking in the view. It's nice, he admitted. I smirked. That's it? Just nice? He let out a soft chuckle. Okay, fine, it's perfect. We stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet ripple of water against the shore. Then Jason spoke again. I still feel weird about everything, I sighed, leaning against the railing. Jason, I know, he interrupted. I know you don't want me to feel guilty, but it's hard not to. I spent years benefiting from something I didn't question. I looked at him, really looked at him. You can't change the past, but you did the right thing in the end. That's what matters. He nodded, staring out at the water. Dad's still pissed, you know, I laughed. Yeah, I figured. He told me he's cutting me off, Jason said. But there was no bitterness in his voice, Just quiet acceptance. I raised an eyebrow. And? He smiled. And I told him I'll be just fine without him. I smiled back. Good. Jason took a deep breath. I guess we both finally broke free, huh? Yeah. I said, feeling the weight of the words. I guess we did. The first time I visited the lake house after everything, I expected it to feel different. I expected anger, resentment, something heavy. But when I pulled up, I felt nothing. It was just a house. I had spent years sacrificing for it, believing it meant something. But the truth was, the lake house had never been about the memories or the legacy. It had been about power, my father's power over me. And now? Now it was just wood and glass. Nothing more. I didn't tell my parents I was coming. I used my key because I still had every right to be there, and walked through the front door. Mom was in the kitchen. She turned, startled. Evelyn? I nodded. Hey, Mom. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, looking nervous. I wasn't expecting you, I figured. She glanced toward the living room, where my father usually sat. But it was empty. Dad's not here? I asked. She hesitated. No, he's been staying in the city more. I raised an eyebrow. Avoiding me? She sighed. Avoiding everything. I didn't feel satisfaction, just confirmation of what I already knew. He had lost control. And without control, he had nothing. Mom studied me carefully. You seem happy. I smiled. I am. She swallowed. I meant what I said before, about seeing things differently. I nodded. I know. She looked down. I don't know how to fix things. I exhaled, considering my words. Maybe it's not about fixing. Maybe it's about moving forward. Separately. Her shoulders slumped. I don't want to lose you. I softened. Mom, I'm not cutting you out. But things are different now. They have to be. She nodded slowly. I understand. And for the first time, I believed her. I left the lake house without looking back. I didn't need to, because my life wasn't tied to that place anymore. Months passed. I settled into my new home, into the life I had built for myself. The silence that had once felt strange now felt like peace. Jason was doing well. Without Dad's support, he had learned to stand on his own. It turned out, when he wasn't being coddled, he was actually pretty capable. Mom reached out every so often. Short messages, small efforts. We weren't close, but we weren't strangers either. And that was enough. Dad? He never called, never wrote. And I was okay with that. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't owe anyone anything. For the first time, my success wasn't a burden. For the first time, my future belonged to me. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Story 2. You would be foolish to act as though you were inexperienced. I had to keep my phone away from my ear as my mother shouted into the phone. We are related. You can't simply leave us because you're upset. Feeling a peculiar combination of anger and numbness, I sat in my home office and stared at the April rain pelting my Burlington townhouse's windows. In front of my eyes, everything I believed to be true about my family had suddenly fallen apart. The reason for this was that my brother Kevin unintentionally sent a basic text message to our family group chat rather than the private one he shared with our parents. Jordan Wright is my name. Up until recently, I believed that by supporting my parents with their retirement expenditures, I was simply being a nice daughter. I am 35 years old. After graduation, I launched a profitable marketing consultancy firm from the ground up, and 5 years ago, when it really took off, I began giving my parents additional money every month. I wanted to ensure that they could enjoy their retirement without having to worry about basic necessities because they had always suffered financially. I had no idea how people actually perceived me. Another $3,000 was recently transferred via the family ATM. My dad's answer to my brother's SMS was hilarious. Continue to operate that gravy train. She's too dim to see that we're taking advantage of her. The golf clubs your father desired were then purchased by my mother. If Jordan found out that her money was being used for them rather than medicine, she would lose it. The screen grabs continued. Years of discussions on how to take advantage of my emotions, manipulate me, and get more money. I scanned through message after message, gasping for air. In a hurry, Kevin attempted to remove them, but it was too late. I had witnessed everything. They laughed at my charity for 3 years, upgraded their automobiles while complaining their heating bill was too high, and planned lavish holidays while informing me they couldn't afford their prescription drugs. My relatives had been bombarding my phone with calls and messages for the last day. My father said that they were only making jokes. I was putting things out of context, according to my mother. Kevin said he was only complying to keep our parents happy, but their own words had revealed the unpleasant reality. The tempest raging inside me matched the intensity of the rain outside. For years, I had been providing for their nice retirement, believing that I was assisting them in surviving. They had been enjoying themselves in the meanwhile, giggling at how simple it was to control their prosperous but dim-witted daughter. I couldn't have predicted how deeply the betrayal would sting. My thoughts were interrupted by a harsh knock. Still holding my phone, I stepped to the door and peered through the crowd. Kevin stood drenched on my porch, his face beseeching. I saw my jaw getting tense. I wasn't prepared for this discussion, but perhaps it was time to listen to him. I had some things to say, after all. I blocked the entry but unlocked the door. "What are you looking for?" Kevin's hair was soaked with rain, and he looked terrible. "Please let me in, Jordan. I can describe anything." "Describe what? How? For years you have all been making fun of me." My phone was still displaying one of his texts when I held it up. "Jordan's dad needs dental surgery," I just told him. "Getting caught?" Kevin begged. "It's not what it looks like." His voice broke. "My parents initiated it, and I simply followed their lead." "So, like some sort of financial Nazi, you were just doing what you were told?" I couldn't stop myself, but the words came out harsher than I had intended. "Kevin, I've been sending $3,000 each month. This amounts to $36,000 annually for 5 years. How much does that total up to?" Kevin cast a downward glance. "It's a lot, I know. Kevin, $180,000. And it doesn't include the additional money for mom's broken furnace or dad's alleged medical bills." The previous winter, recalling how I had foregone a vacation to give them an additional $5,000 for a furnace that evidently never needed to be replaced, I felt nauseous as I said the words. "They went too far, you see." "I understand, but they're 65, not 95, and they're growing older. Dad continues to play golf every weekend with the expensive new clubs I bought for him when I believed he needed medicine." Now, I didn't care whether the neighbors heard me yelling, "Jordan, please, they're going crazy." Regarding his cardiac medicine, Dad is concerned. I gave a sour laugh. "While you all waste the money on luxuries, I've been paying for the true medication he requires, or the medication that doesn't exist." Kevin's expression fell flat. "I made a mistake." "I am aware of that. However, they are now in dire need of your assistance. They've adapted to the lifestyle with all those things. Without you, they would be unable to pay their mortgage. Monthly mortgage on the property by the lake they purchased last year, even though they told me they were having trouble making ends meet in their little flat." A peculiar serenity descended upon me. "You ought to go, in my opinion. Please, Jordan, I have been. Too long, Jordan, please." I'm simply Jordan now. Jordan is finished. My whole body shook as I collapsed onto my couch after Kevin departed. I kept thinking about the screenshots from their group conversation. In one, Jordan was informed by my father that the roof was leaking. "This time, let's see how much we can get out of her." In response, my mother said, "I'm a sucker for helping family. I nearly feel sorry for myself." Nearly. Next, Kevin. Perhaps we ought to establish a betting pool based on how soon she transfers the funds. To them, I had been nothing more than an ATM, a resource that must be depleted, a joke. Every month for the last 5 years, I took out my laptop and went into my banking site. In addition to all the exigencies, there was the $3,000 stat had been moved to my parents' joint account, an additional $40,000. Throughout the years, dental work that never took place, auto repairs for non-existent issues, expenses for medical care they never got. And what had I given up? In order to assist them with their alleged mortgage issues, I postponed purchasing my own house for 2 years. To pay for my life and theirs, I had put in 60-hour work weeks. To ensure them comfort, I had foregone holidays, purchased used furnishings, and made compromises in my own life. For what purpose? That they could make fun of me and purchase golf clubs and vacations while I fretted about whether they were eating healthily. I accessed the investing account I had created for them 3 years prior by opening a new tab. When they turned 70, I had a covert plan to surprise them with an additional retirement fund. Every month, I had been making a $1,000 contribution. There was little over $42,000 in the balance. I moved my finger over the number for the close account button. Not quite yet. For this, I needed to think clearly. My best friend Megan, who was also my lawyer, answered the phone. What did they do? When I told her what was happening, she almost yelled. I know, I answered in a hollow voice. I've been a fool. No, you've been nice, Jordan. It is them who need to be embarrassed. She lowered her voice. What are you interested in doing? I'm not sure, I acknowledged. A part of me wants to just stop talking to them altogether. Part of me wants to confront them and listen to their attempts at self-examination. We need to examine what you have lawfully set up for them before you take any action. Are they covered by any of your insurance plans or accounts? You mean the retirement supplement? I was cold. Beyond the investment account and the monthly remittances, I hadn't really considered all the ways we were intertwined financially. 2 years prior, I had listed them as dependents to my premium health insurance coverage. My plan included coverage for my father's heart medicine, which I now doubt even exists. My life insurance policy also named them as beneficiaries. I have to sort everything out. I spoke out loud, I realized. Megan advised taking things one step at a time. First, compile all of the supporting paperwork you've given them, including bank statements and texts requesting money. Second, enumerate all of the financial ties you must break. Third, determine if you wish to explain your motivation to them. My phone chimed with a text message from my mom as I hung up. Your dad is really unhappy. Your actions have caused his blood pressure to skyrocket. We must now speak. Something hardened within of me. Even now, the deception continued. They were still expecting me to fold. That as soon as they brought up a health issue, I would run. No more. I started capturing screenshots of each monthly transfer once I opened my laptop once more. After that, I began working on a paper called Family Financial Support. After 5 years, I started to enumerate every money, every alleged necessity, and every sacrifice I had made. The truth was unavoidable, and the document was 12 pages long by the time I was done. I was more than simply wounded. I was finished. I woke up the following morning feeling more clear-headed than I have in years. Before any uncertainty could take hold, my course for the future became evident. Telling my assistant that I needed a personal day, I phoned into work. I would have to give this my whole focus. Speaking is Jordan Wright. When my phone rang, I picked it up. Miss Wright, 20 minutes later. Samuel from Vermont Community Bank is here. Regarding the closure of an investment account, I'm returning your call. Indeed. I appreciate you responding to me so promptly. I inhaled deeply. The supplementary retirement account I created for Patricia and Robert must be closed. I see. Would you please let me know if there is an issue with the account? I claimed there was no issue with the account. There is just an issue with the intended receivers. Samuel guided me through the procedure after verifying my identification and account authorization. It had been meant as a gift because I was the only one with authority over the account. Without my parents' knowledge or approval, I could close it. Within 3 business days, the $42,680 would be returned to my principal account. Do you need my assistance with anything else today? Right, miss? Yes, in fact. I want to stop all automatic transfers to Patricia and Robert's joint account. Correct. At the moment, those are fixed at $3,000 every month, right? That's right. I spoke without faltering. That would be nice. Stopped right away. The first step is finished. I then gave my health insurance company a call. This one was more difficult. A qualifying life event was necessary for mid-year changes to dependents, and it wasn't on their list to find out that your parents have been defrauding you. However, Miguel, a sympathetic representative, came up with a solution after I explained my predicament. We can process this as a change in dependent status since they live on their own, and you no longer contribute more than 50% of their income. He clarified that they will be notified at the end of the month that they have been dropped from your policy, giving them 30 days to find other coverage. I said, that's perfect. I appreciate your understanding, Miguel said politely. Family situations can be complicated. I've been there myself. The second step is finished. The simplest change was to the life insurance policy. Using a straightforward online form, a local children's charity took my parents' place as beneficiaries. I had methodically severed all financial ties to my family by noon, with the exception of my brother Kevin. I had been making payments on my student loan for the previous 3 years. He still owed $580 a month for the next 2 years. I paused at that one. Although Kevin had taken part in the deception, he also appeared to have sincere regrets. Was he sorry he was caught? Or had our parents put pressure on him? Kevin texted me, and my phone rang. Both parents are in a panic. Dad claims that the pharmacy refused to refill his prescription. How did you respond to that question? Not a word of understanding or regret, just further pressure to get the money flowing again, I answered. I no longer care about their repercussions. My phone rang right away. Kevin. It was left on voicemail. Rather, the first opened my email and wrote my folks an official letter. Attaching the 12-page paper I'd produced the night before, I named it simply Financial Support Given 2018 to 2023. The email read, Robert and Patricia attached is a complete accounting of the financial help I have supplied over the previous 5 years, totaling $221,865. This includes monthly remittances, emergency cash, medical bills, and the supplemental retirement account I set for you as of today. All recurring transfers have been halted. With effect from May 30 honest, you are no longer considered dependents on my health insurance policy, and the retirement account has been closed. Your dishonesty has been documented with screenshots of your own texts, exposing how you have methodically misled and fooled me. While ridiculing my generosity, please don't get in touch with me again until you need to reimburse me for the money you stole on false pretenses. I read it twice, Jordan Wright. After attaching the document, click send. The third step is finished. After that, I banned their phone numbers. Exhausted yet relieved, I took them off from my social media accounts and reclined in my chair. In years, for the first time, I really did own my money. Before they figured out how to get past my obstacles, I was able to enjoy 3 days of wonderful stillness. 8:30 p.m. Saw the ring at the doorbell. I noticed Kevin and my folks standing on my doorstep as I was going over client presentations via the People. Their expressions were a combination of terror and rage. The door was not opened by me. I gave Megan a call instead. My residence is where they are. As like they could hear me over the walls, I muttered. Don't let them in, she firmly warned. Call the cops for trespassing if they don't go. That seems excessive. Believe me, Jordan, it will be much more difficult to physically and emotionally remove them once they are inside. Jordan started beating as the doorbell rang once more. We know you're in there, my father yelled. You must speak with us before you cut us off. Kevin received an SMS from me. I have nothing to say. I'll contact the cops, so please go. I saw Kevin looking at his phone through the crowd, present it to my parents, and then engage in what seemed to be a contentious debate. My father's face had gone a frightening shade of crimson, and my mother appeared to be sobbing. They eventually departed. My father yelled first, though. Jordan, you will regret this. We are related. You can't simply leave us. I didn't miss the irony of his use of the word abandon. Years ago, they had given up on the idea that they loved me, viewing me as nothing more than a resource to be used. The emails began the following morning. My father's health deteriorated without his medicine, so my mother wrote a long guilt trip about it. In a sharp message, my father demanded that I immediately cease this immature behavior. Kevin begged that without my assistance, our parents would not be able to pay their mortgage. Without answering any of them, I sent them all to Megan. My parents sent me a certified letter 3 days later. There was a message from my mother, Jordan, written by hand. We don't know why you're punishing us in this manner. Sure, we cracked a few offensive jokes, but that's what families do. Without insurance, your father's heart medicine costs $450 a month. We need your assistance to pay off our mortgage, which is due next week. Our condo may be lost. Do you want your elderly parents to live on the streets? Please speak with us and put an end to this abuse. The old man's remark almost made me giggle. Both were healthy and in their 60s. According to the pictures of the country club Kevin had inadvertently shared in one of those fatal snapshots, My father's golf skills had never been better. I pretended to be my mother and contacted the drugstore where my father purchased his medicines. My hubby is the reason I'm calling, Robert composes. Medicine for the heart. Without insurance, how much does it cost? I'll check. When a moment passed, the chemist said, for a 30-day supply, it costs $42. Miss S correct, not $450. One more untruth. As I was leaving my workplace that night, Kevin arrived. He had a horrible appearance. His eyes had dark shadows under them. The clothes were rumpled. Please, Jordan, he remarked as he moved ahead of me. They're disintegrating. Dad is discussing filing for bankruptcy. I have no problem with it, I answered, attempting to avoid him. How come you're so icy? Parents are present. Is it because legitimate parents don't take advantage of their kids? True parents don't make fun of their children behind their backs for being so foolish and naive. No, but they committed mistakes. I interrupted him. Forgetting a birthday is an error. For years, their actions were vicious and well thought out. Kevin, years. The condominium will be foreclosed? Without you, they are unable to make the payments. I briefly felt guilty, but then I recalled a screenshot. I was just persuaded that Jordan was having rent difficulties. Next week, we will close on the lake condo. Let's toast. They ought not to have purchased a home that was above their means. Flatly, I replied. What about Dad's prescription drugs? Not $450, but the prescription that costs $42. If he needs to pay for it, he may get work at Walmart. Kevin's gaze expanded. How did you? I conducted research. Kevin, stop lying. To go to my car, I walked by him. Encouraged them to research government aid initiatives. They are there for that reason. Jordan, I was called after by him. They are discussing living with me. That's more than I can take. I went around again. Kevin, it sounds like a brand new issue. Greetings from the repercussions? I was sitting in a therapy session that I had finally made time for myself, 2 weeks after cutting off contact with my family. I told the whole vile tale to Dr. Bennett, a 50-something lady with good eyes and a no-nonsense manner. I acknowledged that I alternate between feeling powerful and feeling awful every day. My parents had to revoke their country club membership, as I learned yesterday via a mutual acquaintance. In fact, I spent hours feeling bad about it. That's typical, replied Dr. Bennett. You're mourning the family you believe to be yours. Grieving the part you played as their advocate is part of it. However, they weren't worthy of my backing. I was being used by them. Both can be true simultaneously. They weren't worthy of your backing. Additionally, you may still feel sad about not being able to provide it. As Dr. Bennett went on, it seemed to me that being the family provider obviously became a part of who you were. You're reinventing yourself now, without that position. She was correct, but I hadn't considered it that way. I had equated my value with becoming the prosperous daughter who could provide for her parents for 5 years. Now, who was I? My father's brother, Uncle Pete, who lived in Oregon across the nation, called me out of the blue as I was wrapping up my session. I responded out of curiosity, even though we weren't close. Jordan, Uncle Pete is here. Your father called me out of the blue to ask if he and your mother might stay with us for a time. He said that they were about to lose their house and that you had cut them off financially. Is that accurate? I let out a sigh. Uncle Pete, it's tricky. I assumed that selective storytelling was a skill your dad had always possessed. He spoke in a dry tone. Would you mind telling me your side? I then went on to describe everything, including the false information regarding medical costs and the screenshots. There was a lengthy pause when I was done. I am not surprised, he responded at last. Years ago, your father attempted similar antics with me. We're not close because of it. I wouldn't pay for his lifestyle. You were aware? I experienced betrayal once more. How come you didn't warn me? Did you think I was real? They made you believe that you were their hero and that they were having difficulties. Sometimes the truth must be found on one's own. He was correct. I never would have trusted him. I promised your father I wouldn't take them in, just for the record, he added. I advised them to live within their means and downsize. When we disconnected, he hung up on me. I had an odd sense of validation. I wasn't insane for interrupting them. I wasn't a bad daughter at all. The most recent victim of their deception was myself, and I had finally come to my senses. Later that night, Kevin texted me from a different number. Next week, My parents will move into my extra room. The unit is being sold. It's infuriating, Dad. It's unbelievable that this is taking place. I didn't answer. Another text 3 days later. The unit is for sale. Yesterday, Dad's automobile was repossessed. This is becoming a serious problem. I nearly responded to the SMS. Nearly inquired if they required assistance with relocating costs. However, I then recalled a specific screenshot that Kevin had scribbled on. Jordan recently inquired about his father's health following his visit to the doctor for the heart condition. That isn't real, ha 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 ha. They had already made up their minds. They were now dealing with the fallout. In the 3rd week, I received an email from a person I didn't know. Your parents' message in the subject line. It appears that because I had blocked them everywhere, they had asked a family friend to get in touch. The message described how they had to apply for food assistance, which my proud father thought was dishonorable, how they had to sell the majority of their furniture, and how the stress was causing my father's health to deteriorate. They just want a chance to talk to you, to explain and apologize, the email continued. I gave it 5 seconds of thought before selecting delete. Whatever they believed would turn the money tap back on would be their version of an apology. I had had enough of being their ATM and being misled. In years, for the first time. Instead of funding their fictitious crises, my money was going towards my future. Something unexpected was taking the place of the guilt. Liberty. My parents were sitting on my porch steps when I got home from a business trip, 6 months after I had severed all communication. My mother's well-manicured highlights had grown out, exposing gray roots, and my father had lost weight. Both of them were dressed in unfamiliar clothing, less expensive than what they typically wear. My first impulse was to turn around and go, but in therapy, Dr. Bennett and I had talked about this possibility. Now I was stronger. I could confront them without being coerced. With my pulse racing, I parked in the driveway and walked carefully up. Jordan, what are you doing here? The voice of my mother broke. We just want to chat, please. My father continued. We've learned our lesson. It's been terrible these past several months. My door was unlocked. You've got 5 minutes. Within. I stood with my arms crossed as they sat clumsily on my couch. We apologize, my mother said. Your kindness should never have been used. My dad gave a nod. Everything is gone. Our funds, the vehicle, and the condo. Kevin's house is so little, and we had to move in with him. Your mom must use a pull-out couch to sleep. Our membership in the country club was canceled. All of our pals were added there by my mother. They no longer call. In the absence of your insurance, the cost of my medications has been quite high, my dad went on. Not everything is covered by Medicare. While I wait for a true apology, I listen to them and make a list of all they've lost. It never materialized. No, we apologize for causing you pain, or we were mistaken to make fun of you. Just a list of their troubles and the insinuation that I was to blame. Is that it? When they were at last quiet, I inquired. My mom responded, We want to put things right. Jordan, we've endured a lot. Our lesson has been learnt. What would be the lesson? We shouldn't have taken you for granted, they said, exchanging looks. At last, my dad said, Interpretation. They need to have been more cautious to avoid being discovered. No, I answered quietly. Nothing has been learnt by you. What are you saying? My mom inquired. She raised her voice a little. We have traveled this far to express our regret. No, to tell me how much you've suffered without my money, you've come this far. You have never once shown regret for the way your treachery affected me. We expressed regret. My father objected to being discovered. Not for what you did, perhaps. I inhaled deeply. Over the last 6 months, I've given a lot of consideration to what constitutes a healthy family. This isn't it. It's not making fun of your child behind her back and treating her like an ATM. My mom's expression grew stern. You will continue to penalize us for a few jokes then? This isn't a penalty. This is my way of defending myself against those who have demonstrated that they are not looking out for my best interests. We are your parents. As if that clarified everything, my father remarked. Furthermore, I wasn't your personal bank. I was your daughter. I walked over to the door and opened it. I hope the best for you. I do. I wish you luck in finding a comfortable way to live within your budget. However, I am no longer able to be a part of your lives." "That's not what you mean." With tears in her eyes, my mother whispered, "You are necessary to us. That's the issue. I'm not necessary for you. What I can give you is what you need." There is a distinction. My father's previous remorse was replaced by wrath as he stood. "That's all." Then, "What specifically have you done for me, Dad, after everything we've done for you?" In addition, take, and take. He didn't know how to respond. As they left the building, my mom turned around. "Jordan, you'll regret this. In the end, family is all you have." I gave a headshake. "No, Mother. The folks in your family are meant to love you without conditions. Together with my buddies, I've created that family. Your offer was only a business deal." I leaned against the door and shut it. I anticipated feeling remorse or sorrow when I heard their footsteps disappear down the trail. Rather, I experienced a profound sensation of tranquility. I was genuinely free for the first time in my adult life, and the ATM was shut down for good. Story 3. Venus. Give back what isn't yours. My mother-in-law. Judith let out a scream. Her voice reverberated across the opulent ballroom. "My daughter's birthright was stolen by you." As everyone in the room turned to look at me, the lights in the crystal chandelier seemed to go down. I stood with the frozen champagne glass almost falling out of my hand, my pulse thumping in my chest. Just an hour ago, I, Venus Carter, a 31-year-old pianist, had no idea that I would be managing my father's manufacturing business. Sincerely expecting to patch things up, I had entered the Westbrook Hotel ballroom for Judith's 55th birthday celebration. My father had been dead for a year, and the atmosphere between us was oppressive. I thought maybe she was finally ready to go when her invitation arrived last week. I was completely mistaken. An olive branch was not what this was. An ambush occurred. Pamela was the rightful owner of the business. Judith went on, creeping in my direction while rumors echoed through the gathering. "You took advantage of your father when he was ill, and he established that company for his kids." Desperate to find a friendly face amid the sea of Houston's corporate elite, I looked around the room. I had been dealing with these clients, suppliers, and community leaders for months, and they seemed to appreciate me. They gazed now in a mix of surprise and mounting disdain. Even to my own ears, I sounded little when I responded, "That's not what happened." Dad had a clear will. He desired. He wanted the corporation to be his real daughter. Judith interrupted me. "Not his charity case who played the piano and seldom ever came to see him." My eyes began to flood up with tears as her comment struck a chord. It's true that I hadn't spent as much time at home as I should have throughout my years of professional touring. Even though I had to deal with the guilt on a daily basis, it was heartbreaking to hear it publicly. Pamela, my stepsister, was standing behind Judith. Her lips formed an arrogant grin. She had never expressed any interest in the company when her father was still living, but now she nodded in agreement with everything her mother said. "It's true, you know." From a close table, someone whispered. When Thomas became ill, she emerged out of nowhere, which always struck me as odd. There was another voice. As more voices joined the chorus, I felt as though the room was closing in on me. In fact, someone booed. The rumors turned into a tsunami of open animosity in a matter of minutes. "You ought to go," Judith remarked. With the assurance of someone who knew she had won, her voice became serene. At the party, no one wants a thief. One idea became clear to me as I made my way to the exit, my legs shaking under me. I wouldn't tolerate this. Not this evening. Never. I managed to get to my car before I started crying. I sobbed as I sat in the dark parking lot, gripping the driving wheel. The embarrassment pierced me like acid. These were no ordinary individuals. They were members of Houston's corporate community, and I had spent the last year trying to gain their respect. For more than 40 years, my father, Thomas Carter, had started Carter Manufacturing from nothing. After my mother passed away while my father was still living, he married Judith when I was 15 years old, bringing her and our 12-year-old daughter Pamela into the world. Judith had been a caring wife, but 3 years ago, he received a cancer diagnosis, and everything changed. He held my hand while I sat next to his hospital bed. "Venus," his voice was faint, but resolute. "Pamela lacks the commercial acumen that you possess. Despite her intelligence, she has little interest in Carter manufacturing. Do you? I've observed how you break things down and figure out what makes them function. Then he had gripped my hand. I'm letting you run the business. Additionally, I need you to swear that you will take care of it. In order to keep that vow, I had sacrificed my touring career. When the will was presented, Pamela and Judith had initially appeared to agree with his choice. But the weakening started in a matter of weeks. Initially subtle, then more overt. The public conclusion of a year-long attempt to defame me came tonight. Bernard Wesley, my father's longtime lawyer and the executor of his estate, texted me while I was wiping away my tears. Heard about it just now. Are you all right? Give me a call. I called right away, still trembling as I described what had happened that night. This is unacceptable, Bernard exclaimed in his well-known, outraged baritone. Judith is fully aware that your father was sane at the time he made that decision. Will he be able to justify his choices on video? She has lost all 3 of her appeals against the will. Bernard, everyone believes her, I muttered. Everyone in the room believes me to be a cunning thief. After a little silence, Bernard posed the question that would make all the difference. Are you carrying your laptop? I have it in my trunk, I answered, perplexed by the abrupt change. Excellent. In half an hour, meet me in my office. Let's tell the whole narrative if Judith wants to make this public. Your father left you every document, court file, every piece of proof to shield you from just this kind of situation. Since leaving the ballroom, this is the first time. I experienced something more than embarrassment. A glimmer of resolve flared in my chest. In 20 years, I'll be there, I remarked as I turned on the engine. Bernard's office remained illuminated. He buzzed me in as soon as I parked into the downtown glass and steel building's parking lot, and I saw him surrounded by piles of folders and binders. He pointed to the well-labeled papers and said, I've been organizing these since your father passed. Thomas was aware that Judith may attempt this. That was his strategy. Always planning a few steps ahead. I walked the office as Bernard grabbed files, my embarrassment slowly giving way to wrath. Why she would act in such a public manner is beyond me. She has already lost her challenge to the will. What is she hoping to acquire? Bernard's gray eyes peered up. Severe control. For Judith, looks and social status have always been important. She will attempt to turn the business community against you in an attempt to make your position unsustainable if she is unable to obtain the firm lawfully. She's doing well. Recalling the nasty looks, I mumbled, not for very long. In response, Bernard reorganized papers into fresh stacks. Your father repeatedly recorded everything. According to Pamela, she was not interested in the company. The planning meetings you two held on the weekends while you were at home, and the management classes he urged you to take virtually while on tour. I was given a USB disc by him. This includes your father's video testimonial outlining his reasoning. 3 months before to his death, he recorded it. In particular, to stop Judith from questioning his competence. I gripped the drive, recalling how Dad's thinking was still razor-keen despite his weakness that day. I was aware of this recording at the time. Since his passing, I have not had the courage to view it. There's more. Bernard's ongoing financial records demonstrate that since taking over, you have increased the company's growth by 22%. Testimonials from employees on how you avoided layoffs following the collapse of the Anderson contract. Pamela rejected your offer of a directorship, which included too much tedious paperwork, according to the board meeting minutes. I started to formulate a strategy. Is your color printer still blazingly fast, Bernard? His face lit up with comprehension as he grinned. Yes, it is. I also have a lot of binders. We collaborated for the following hour to arrange indisputable records that revealed the real history of Carter Manufacturing. Succession. Bernard copied out copies of employee letters, financial statements, and court rulings. For each table during the gala, I arranged them in presentation binders. While we were working, 3 of Bernard's colleagues agreed to meet us at the hotel when he called them. These well-known lawyers would give our presentation more legitimacy. As we came to an end, Bernard remarked, "This isn't just about clearing your name tonight. The goal here is to permanently secure your place. Judith won't be able to discredit you after this." I looked at my watch shortly after 10 o'clock. They would still be in the middle of the gala. You know, I replied, packing the binders into Bernard's SUV. In business, you don't just defend yourself when attacked, my father used to tell me. Your opponent regrets even challenging you because of the overwhelming proof you provide in response. Bernard grinned. Tonight, he would be pleased with you. I inhaled deeply. Come on. There was silence on the trip back to the Westbrook Hotel. As Bernard negotiated traffic on a Saturday night in downtown Houston, my anxious energy filled the vehicle. Each binder, which seemed to hold my whole existence, was placed in the back seat. My diligence, my legality, and my father's wishes. As we drew up to the valet stand, Bernard reminded us to remember, tonight, you are more than simply Thomas Carter's daughter. You are Carter Manufacturing's CEO. The SUV was unloaded. 3 of Bernard's coworkers are joining us at the door. Around me, the 4 lawyers in their immaculate suits formed a strong image that resembled a legal stronghold. The doorman who had witnessed my tearful escape now moved aside, his eyes wide. As we got closer to the ballroom doors, my heart pounded. As if nothing had happened, the gala seemed to be going on. Expensive perfume hovered in the air, crystal glasses clinked, and a well-known waltz was played by the string quartet. However, there was silence across the closest tables. As soon as I entered the doorway, as heads turned and conversation ceased, the quiet swept across the room like a wave. Judith appeared victorious as she stood close to the cake display, champagne flute in hand. Her smile disappeared when she saw me. Beside her, Pamela clutched her mother's arm and said something urgent. Bernard said, "Ladies and gentlemen," his commanding voice echoing over the room, "I apologize for the disruption. I'm Bernard Wesley, Thomas Carter's longtime attorney and estate executor. Regarding Carter Manufacturing, I think there has been some miscommunication that needs to be cleared up. Earlier this evening, when the quartet finished performing, everyone in the room was staring at us. Venus Carter, the legitimate CEO of Carter Manufacturing, was the target of grave charges." Bernard went on to say that my coworkers and I are here to provide the factual and legal record as court officials. As we proceeded, my legs shook a little. As the lawyers started handing out folders to each table, I went straight to the tiny stage where the foursome was seated. I was given the microphone by one of the musicians. I was charged with stealing my father's business 2 hours ago. I started, speaking more steadily than I had anticipated. I was referred to be a manipulator and a thief. I was embarrassed and jeered in front of you all. I stopped and looked around the room. Some of the visitors couldn't look me in the eye and glanced down. Others looked perplexed, their brows wrinkled as they opened the binders. That sequence was planned by Judith Carter, my stepmother. She has challenged my father's will in court 3 times, which she failed to disclose to you. Bernard displayed the court documents onto the big screen behind me when I gave him a nod. My father's desires were clear and enforceable, so she lost every time. 2 of Bernard's coworkers moved fluidly into Judith's path as she began to approach me. I went on, "I'd like you to hear from my father before you hear from me." Bernard linked the sound equipment to the USB drive. After the image wavered, my father showed there, looking thin yet alert. As my father's image showed on the television, the room at home, where he was sitting in his study, fell silent. He sat upright in his leather chair, despite his condition. Although his once strong body has thinned, his intelligent eyes remained keen. Many folks let out a gasp. In his latter months, he had become so devastated that some had failed to notice. "Thomas Carter is my name." His voice was forceful yet gruff as he started. "This declaration was recorded on March 15th of last year in front of my lawyer, Bernard Wesley, and my mental competency attested by Dr. Catherine Wilson." Before returning to my father, the camera moved momentarily to show both professions. "I am Carter Manufacturing's founder and CEO. I have made the decision to give my daughter, Venus Carter, a controlling stake in my business after giving it careful consideration." Dad moved a little and squirmed in pain, then went on. "I would want to discuss the reasons for my decision. After I'm gone, it could lead to conflict, as I expect." He appeared to be staring at Judith. Venus had shown the intelligence and drive required to run Carter Manufacturing, despite the fact that he had no idea she would be watching this film at her birthday celebration a year later. She has devoted many hours to studying the corporation, examining our processes, and comprehending our sector. even though she has a vocation as a pianist. At my recommendation, she has taken business classes and demonstrated a great talent for strategic planning. The film switched to scenes of my dad and I going over plans and visiting with clients at the plant. I was not even aware that I was being filmed. Over the years, Pamela, my stepdaughter, has been given several chances to get involved with the business, but she has always turned them down. She said, quote, "I have no interest in spending my life making boring industrial parts," in response to a direct question. Then, at a taped meeting in her father's office, Pamela declined a management training role after rolling her eyes and speaking those identical words during a family meal. "I adore both of my girls," Dad went on. "However, a business needs a leader who is passionate about it. That love is Venus's. I made this choice because I am in good physical and mental health." Dr. Wilson's qualifications were shown beneath her name as she confirmed Dad's mental capacity on screen. My father was staring straight into the camera when the video drew to a close. "I have faith that Venus will safeguard my legacy and the means of subsistence for all employees at Carter Manufacturing." I scanned the room as the TV went dark. Now a large number of visitors were leafing through the binders. Their previous judgment was replaced with expressions of astonishment and dismay. "Carter Manufacturing has seen a 22% increase in revenue since I took over," I remarked over the microphone. "Despite losing the Anderson contract, we've gained 17 people, entered 2 new markets, and avoided layoffs." I gave Bernard a nod, and he brought up the financial charts. Letters from our staff, many of whom have been with my father for decades, may be found on page 12 of your binders. They said they supported my leadership, and I paused to catch my breath. The official job offer Pamela received 3 months ago, which was for a director role with considerable authority but less day-to-day operational responsibilities, is on page 15. She said she had better things to do than waste time at a factory when she rejected by email. Several visitors turned to stare at Pamela, and I could see her face getting redder. "The court rulings dismissing Judith's objections to my father's will are in the last part," I replied, my voice becoming louder. "No evidence of undue influence or manipulation was identified by 3 judges. The medical records attested to Dad's complete competence in making his choice." I took a step closer and briefly put down the microphone to stare straight at Judith, who was motionless next to the cake display. "Loud enough for everyone to hear," I shouted. "You asked me to return what isn't mine. However, as these records unequivocally demonstrate, Carter Manufacturing is just where my father intended it to be." I took the microphone back in my hands and turned to speak to the whole room. "I am aware that a lot of you were duped tonight. You heard one side of a complex story and made a decision based on insufficient details." I took a moment to look around the ballroom. "You're not to fault for it. Before you make any further decisions, I do urge that you examine the data that is currently in front of you." The room had changed in tone. The animosity had vanished, to be replaced with uneasiness and shame. Our biggest client's CEO, Gregory Thompson, got up from his chair. "I must apologize to you, Venus," he continued, his voice echoing around the room. "I ought to have realized better than to blindly accept such grave charges." His public recognition appeared to be a game changer. The other visitors started to go through the binders more carefully. Slowly, someone at a rear table began to cheer, and others followed suit. Pamela followed Judith as she stormed at me after finally breaking through the attorney's roadblock. "You dare?" Her voice was low but poisonous as she growled. "You've made this celebration of my birthday into a business pitch. Thomas should never have abandoned you for this reason. Your sense of decorum and class are lacking." Knowing that everyone in the room was watching us, I smiled composedly. "Interesting viewpoint, Judith. Considering that you publicly accused me of stealing and had me evicted at your own birthday celebration," Pamela interrupted, her voice trembling with rage. "You played tricks on him when he was dying. You were hardly present at all." Bernard took the medication and moved forward. "In fact, during your father's last 6 months, Venus paid him 83 visits, according to the hospital and hospice facilities visitation logs. Pamela, according to these same data, you came 12 times. You came 37 times, Miss S. Carter." Pamela opened and closed her mouth, but nothing came out. "Our future was meant to be secured by the corporation. At last, Judith muttered, letting all pretense go. Thomas assured me that we would always be looked for. You are, too? I gave a forceful response. Both of you benefited much from Dad's bequest. His trusts guarantee that you will never have to worry about money, so that only they could hear. I dropped my voice. He understood what would happen to his life's work if he gave it to you, which is why he didn't do it. Anger twisted Judith's face. I was afraid she was going to hit me. Rather, she took Pamela by the arm and started dragging her in the direction of the exit. It's not over yet. Over her shoulder, she tossed. It is, in fact. She was nicknamed after by Bernard. We shall pursue fines for any additional legal challenges that are deemed to be vexatious litigation. When the doors closed behind them, there was a noticeable release of tension in the room. Visitors started coming up to me to apologize and congratulate me on the company's accomplishments. Although they hadn't felt comfortable speaking up, several acknowledged that they had always thought. Judith's story was strange. My father's old CFO, Edward Winters, who had worked with him for 20 years before retiring, came to join me. Thomas was correct about you. Squeezing my hand, he said, his backbone is in you. He used to remark that you had his commercial acumen, but your mother's genius. My eyes stung with tears. This time, however, these weren't humiliating tears. Thank you, Edward. To me, that is everything. As the evening went on, I was surrounded by people who were encouraging rather than mocking. Bernard was standing close. His smile showed satisfaction. The lawyer started gathering up the binders. They had done their job. Now what? As the party slowly reverted to its usual state, Bernard questioned. The event was filled with Houston's business elite, many of whom would play a key role in the future success of Carter Manufacturing. I straightened my shoulders and whispered, now. After all, I network. Tonight, I'm more than simply Thomas Carter's daughter. I am Carter Manufacturing's CEO. It's been 6 months since Judith's terrible birthday celebration. That night was a turning moment in my self-perception, as well as in how the business community saw me. Returning to that ballroom with facts and proof had changed me in ways I'm still learning about. The growth of Carter Manufacturing has exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Several people contacted me with potential business prospects after the event. 3 hesitant former clients returned with long-term contracts, and Gregory Thompson's firm increased their order. We have added 32 new workers to our staff and opened a second location in Austin. Nobody anticipated the fallout for Judith and Pamela. Pamela unexpectedly showed up at my workplace 2 weeks after the gala. She twisted her hands anxiously as she sat across from me. She stated plainly, I need a job. My confidence in Dad won't completely develop for another 3 years, and Mom has spent the majority of her own funds on those legal disputes. I looked for deceit in my stepsister's expression, but all I saw was despair. Why visit me? Particularly in light of all that transpired? Because, she grudgingly confessed, the only one who is truly succeeding is you. The rest of the people in Mom's social circle are acting. I gave Pamela an entry-level job in our marketing division, defying Bernard's advice. I was shocked when she said yes. Even more unexpectedly, she has demonstrated a true talent for the job. We're not pals. We might not be either. However, our professional regard for one another is rising. In contrast, Judith departed Houston soon after the event. She apparently went to Phoenix in order to pursue a new wealthy widower. Since then, we haven't crossed paths, and I don't think we ever will. There have been similarly substantial changes in my personal life. Music had been my identity for years. The piano had been my steady companion during the painful family transition and my youthful loneliness following the death of my mother. During the demanding conservatory and touring schedule, Dad married Judith. I assumed I was only taking a short hiatus from performance when my dad became ill, but the task of leadership has awoken something unexpected in me as a result of leading Carter Manufacturing, the fulfillment that comes from addressing issues and generating jobs. I find fulfillment in these things that I never would have imagined. After finishing my duties for the day, I still play the piano, generally late at night. However, I now have a more intimate and non-performative relationship with music. I did something my dad would have been proud of last month. I founded the Thomas Carter Foundation with the goal of introducing music instruction to Texas's impoverished schools. Young entrepreneurs can also receive business coaching from the foundation, fusing the two aspects of my life to create something significant. I had my first public performance since taking over the firm at our launch event. We took a grand piano inside the building and played my father's favorite Chopin nocturne. I was playing with the machines my father had constructed. I felt his presence more powerfully than I had, surrounded by the workers whose livelihoods he had protected and me now safeguarded. I've come to understand that inheritance is more than simply possessions and property since his passing. It's about adding our own special contributions while preserving the greatest aspects of the people we've lost. Carter Manufacturing is today cited by the corporate sector that previously jeered me as an example of ethical leadership and creativity. The business prospers. Pamela is figuring things out. Additionally, I found a new balance between my past self as an artist and my current self as a businesswoman. Dad was correct all along. Not all legacies are taken. They must be earned.